You're listening to Catholic Chicago. Ahead, the Archdiocese of Chicago brings you programs about the people, events, and issues that touch our lives. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Good morning and welcome to Focus on the Liturgy, an element of programming of Catholic Chicago here on 750 AM WNDZ, and to those of us following on Facebook and YouTube, the live stream. I'm Todd Williamson from the Office for Divine Worship.
And I'm Timothy Johnston from St. Thomas the Apostle.
Here in the Archdiocese.
That's right.
And the second time of being in studio.
Yep.
We were both in last month. We are here every fourth Wednesday of the month, and our program does exactly what the title says. We spend an hour breaking open various parts of the church's liturgical life.
And it's always a great joy to do so. And we're going to continue breaking that open and nerding out as we usually do on all wonderful things liturgical.
We continue our series that we began July.
I think
it was July, right
after
Pope Francis issued his latest apostolic letter, Desiderio, Desideravi, with the deepest desire I have desired to eat this meal with you. It was issued on June 29th, the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, and it is on the liturgical formation of the people of God. And so since then, we've just been breaking open different aspects of it.
Yeah, I'm going to remind the listeners that this was written to the whole church. Like, it wasn't just for bishops or priests. Like, this was written
to
scholars. Like, he wrote it so we all have access to it to talk about. And one of the things, as we've talked about, over these last few months, is the beauty of what Pope Francis is doing is inviting us into a deeper knowledge, not just the head knowledge,
yes,
but the heart, like the actual experience of celebrating and encounter, which is a theme throughout his whole
papacy. That's a starting point, right? That's a starting point. That Jesus' deepest desire, I have desired with the deepest desire to eat with you. That his desire to encounter us in the sacraments and in particular in the Mass. And you're right. He's not after the and we'll touch on it today, but he's not after the academia. He's not after a master's degree in liturgy.
Right.
He wants us to encounter heart to heart, as you just said.
Yeah. And there's an intimacy in not only what he writes, but the way that he's trying to invite us into the liturgical celebration. That encounter, as Jesus himself desires, but we too have a desire that sometimes we don't name, we don't articulate.
Pope Francis says in the letter, we might not even know it.
Yeah.
He says the first reason we are there, it isn't because of a sense of obligation. The first reason we are at Mass isn't because we want to feel good. It's not because we're afraid that if we don't, we're going to go to hell. He says the first reason you're there, even though you might not know it, is his thirst for us.
Yes. You just made me think of, Todd, we at the parish, we just celebrated rite of acceptance into the Order of Catechumens with a young girl. And when we asked, what does she ask of God's church, we rephrased it a little bit for her. She responded, she's like, I want to belong to a place that loves like Jesus loves and cares for people like Jesus cares for people.
Oh my gosh!
And
uncoached?
I would say there was some preparation for her to help her articulate, but it wasn't. It wasn't something.
It was her.
It was her. It wasn't something we wrote out for her to say.
That's fantastic.
But it was through her catechetical sort of preparation to be able to articulate that. And in some ways, when I heard that during that celebration, I thought about this letter even. In the sense of
course you would.
This right, this encounter, this helping her to name and articulate, as we do with all the baptized, is what are we desiring? And she's desiring this church that loves as Jesus loves.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And that and that's what we encounter, Pope Francis says, when we encounter Christ in the sacraments and at Mass, his love, right? His Deacon Dick Hudzik, the former vicar for Deans, just had a line about this letter, and that just grabbed me. He says, Francis places the Mass in the ocean of Jesus's heart.
Oh, nice.
Isn't that? I
do
give
like
full
that.
credit to Deacon Hudzik. It was a line that just caught me, and that's what Francis does. He places our participation in the Eucharist in the ocean of Jesus's heart.
Yeah, that's a beautiful image to swim around.
Yeah.
I like that. Be a little a punny there. But that actually leads, I think, beautifully into what we're going to talk about today in terms of we want to look at the document and break open a little bit about what symbolic language means. And as that phrase, that image of Jesus's, the ocean of, what was it? Jesus,
The ocean of Jesus's heart.
It makes me think about, and I think Pope Francis gets at this too, is there isn't just knowledge to know about the liturgy. Like, oh, I know X, Y, Z, and I'm done. But as you've said, Todd, in different workshops I've been in over the years, we can peel back so many different layers every time we come to the Mass, every time we celebrate a sacrament. There's the symbolic language that we have within our tradition isn't just there. It is to draw us into this real encounter with the living God. And so we continue to peel back the layers of those symbols, which that's what we're going to dive into and kind of talk about how that plays out in this document.
Yep, as we've been doing since July, we've been taking different themes and different points that Pope Francis makes in this letter. And I mean, Timothy, you, Danielle, and I, who, by the way, is not with us today, but she's fine. She'll be with us again next month. But we could have a schedule of topics for the rest of the year.
Oh, for sure.
In breaking this open. And I mean, I think we should. I think that's what Francis is calling us to. That's what this show is all about. This is what we hope to pass on to listeners, is a deeper, maybe like you said, another layer can be peeled away in your understanding and experience of the liturgy of our church.
Well, I think you're exactly right. This is exactly what Pope Francis, I think, this is the way I read it, was hoping, is that we would sit and break this open. But if you read, well, certainly if you've read all of Francis's writings up to this point even, there's an authenticity of what he's trying to do here. Like, he genuinely, I read, at least that's how I'm reading it, genuinely desires that the people of God have a renewed sense of what the liturgical life of our church is.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It isn't just, he's not just like writing another document to do it. I think because of his formation as a religious, maybe I'm reading into this too much, his emotion, in a sense, in the best sense of that, comes out, I think, in this kind of writing where he himself desires the closeness with Christ.
You cannot miss that in him.
And therefore, he desires us to also share as he shares or desires to share. Like, that same desire that he as Pope, as church, if you will, like, he wants that for us, just as Jesus wants that for us, right? And I think that's one of the things I loved about this document. It just drew me in because, as I've said over the last few months, because of that renewal, like that sense of we've got something wonderful here, and we need to continue to break it open and continue to encounter Christ present in our liturgical life, in the sacramental celebrations. Because it's there that we will deepen who we are and know who we are as church.
And be transformed by that encounter with Christ, transformed more and more and more into his image, which he also talks about, the divinization of humanity. And we need to get that into a future show, because that's a whole, right? But that the Christ shared in our humanity so that we could become divine, not at some future date, not when I die, right? Well, yeah, I'll share in his divinity when I'm dead, and God willing in heaven. No, he wants to make us divine now, here, at this moment in my life, at that moment, at this moment in your life, in the moment, this moment for all of our listeners. He desires to make us divine in his image.
And that, I mean,
we're jumping ahead.
Just sit and ponder that the rest of the day, and you'll be great. But no, and again, because of that, that's why he is so adamant, I think, about us celebrating the liturgy well, because it is about this encounter. It is about being raised up or becoming more fully who God created us to be. And so, the divinization piece, like, it matters the way we celebrate. It matters the way we preach. It matters all of those things because it plays into not only it plays into the encounter, but it plays into how we see ourselves in the very person of Christ.
Yeah, and how we see ourselves in the world, and how we see ourselves in relationship to everyone else, our brothers and sisters in the church, all of it. You had made mention that the topic for today, it really is kind of a continuation of last month. So you remember, Danielle, and I last month, we talked about the creation in Desiderio, and how Pope Francis talks about all of creation was focused on this moment, right, of the Last Supper. And we talked about how Pope Francis notes that it is the very objects of creation, the very things that God created himself, that are the vehicles for that encounter. And the language of symbol, right? The symbolic language, symbolic action that Pope Francis raises a number of times in Desiderio, and poses the question that I know we're going to get to reference a couple of times. Have we lost the capacity to speak the language of symbols? Have we lost the capacity to and to be able to enter into symbols in this culture, in this society? Tim and I were talking before, laughing. Well, neither of us are symbolologists, so we might not be able to speak how symbols are used in this society now, and what are the symbols that people notice, and all of that. But we do know the language of liturgical symbols, the symbolic language of liturgy.
Yeah. I think it's a question that we've asked before on the show about the capacity to encounter, because we aren't secular symbol folks in that sense, but the ways that we look at the world, our sacramental worldview, if you will, affects how we encounter the water, the wine, the wheat, the oil, all of those different, the standing and sitting and signing ourselves with the cross, all of those different gestures and symbolic actions that and symbols themselves take on new meaning within the liturgical context. So, but then they in theory should feed back into how we view the world. So, sitting at the meal at Eucharist, that Sunday dinner at home with my family, or a breakfast, there's a relationship to the sharing of the Eucharistic meal that is real. It's a real sharing, right? And the real communion then that happens around the table with mom, dad, sister, brother, or aunts, uncles,
or friends, or work, or co-workers, or
those at the soup kitchen who are feeding, working with the homeless and making sure they're fed and cared for. There's that's the depth of symbolic language, or part of it. It's not the end all be all, right? But that is part of what we're getting at, that what we celebrate deepens how we understand and look at the world.
I think that's a great place to start after we come back from this first break. The idea of a sacramental worldview. What is a sacramental worldview? That's where we'll pick it up when we come back from these messages. So stay with us for more Focus on the Liturgy.
Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement Program has been especially busy this year, assisting individuals and families who have fled dangerous situations in their homeland, including Afghanistan and the Ukraine. The Refugee Resettlement Team helps with everything they need to start to rebuild their lives in a new country, including housing, employment, clothing, food, English classes, and referrals for legal and immigration services. The refugees are tremendously grateful for the compassion and practical help they're receiving, and they're giving back and helping each other plan for a brighter, safer future. Volunteer opportunities are currently available for those who would like to be family mentors and tutors so children and adults can practice English. To learn more about these rewarding opportunities, call 312-655-7096. That's 312-655-7096.
There is no doubt this life is short. It is in you I trust to spread your truths, your goodness, and love. It is you who will give a leader to our church. Who will fill these shoes?
Did you know that Catholic Charities accepts car donations? If you're ready to free up space in your garage and put a stop to all those expenses that go along with owning a car, we will gratefully accept your donation, whether the car is running or not. You choose a pickup time that is convenient for you, and we will make the donation as easy as possible free of charge. You'll receive a charitable donation receipt as well. We accept all types of vehicles nationwide, and you will know that your donation is made to Catholic Charities, an agency you can trust. To learn more about donating your car, call 877-786-4483. That's 877-786-4483. Thank you.
Welcome back to Focus on the Liturgy here on Catholic Chicago, that's it. I'm Todd Williamson from the Office for Divine Worship.
And I'm Timothy Johnston from St. Thomas and Hyde Park.
We are without Danielle this month, but she will be back. We're talking, as we have been for the last number of months, about the Pope's latest apostolic letter, Desiderio, Desideravi, on the liturgical formation of the people of God. And in each month we've been taking a different theme, a different idea of Pope Francis, and today we're breaking open the idea of symbolic language, because Pope Francis he brings it up a number of times in the letter, basically talking about the fact that you can't, in order to encounter Christ in the sacraments and in the Mass, you need to know the language of symbols. Mm-hmm. And at that last break, Timothy, I think all that starts with having a sacramental worldview. And I wonder, along with Pope Francis, if we as modern Catholics have lost that, if we've lost a sacramental worldview, a sense of the sacramentality of life, in this world. That God created. Have we lost a sacramental sense? So before that break, we said, come back to talk about what do we mean when we say a sacramental worldview? What does that mean for you?
Well, yeah. So one of the first things to kind of break open then is that just word of worldview, or that phrase.
What is a worldview?
Our worldview sort of it's the predominant way that we sort of look at how life unfolds, not only for us but around us. So the way that we look at the war in Ukraine or our political situation in the United States, like it's a way that we interpret, or whatever sort of philosophy or theological underpinnings might play into that, or politics even within that. So it's sort of how we are looking in and analyzing, synthesizing, and putting that together.
Yeah, it's how we see and understand life.
Yeah,
and my life in it. My worldview is how I see and understand life in general, the world in general, but then even get more concrete, my place in the world, my lot in life, as it were. During the break, I was telling Timothy about a family member this is her worldview. life is nothing but one big battle. That's her worldview. That's how she sees and understands life, her place in it, her role in it. It's a battle, and you just need to survive, and you need to fight, and you need to scratch and claw, and that's life.
Yeah.
That's it. But then you had a great image that you used before.
Yeah. So
your worldview is like,
well, when we talk about sacraments, and maybe this isn't what you were getting at, but one of the things I used to would tell my students, like when we talk about the sacramental worldview, is I would always use the image of my glasses and sort of thinking about putting those on, that it's a lens through which we see the world. And so very cheesily, I would say they're my Christ lenses in that sense. Like I see the world because my baptism has changed me, because I share in the passion, death, resurrection, and the incarnation of Christ. All of those things we've talked about even in last month's show, because I've been changed, I see the world that way now. I see the world as Christ invites me to see. So I see that homeless person differently.
Sees the world the way Christ invites us to see it.
And that seeing demands something of us. Whereas maybe that worldview of it's a battle doesn't necessarily demand anything of you. It could, but Christ...
You just kind of, you're right.
But Christ demands something. It's about love. It's about building up and showing and fostering what the kingdom is, not what it can be, but what it is. And we're supposed to be building that up. And I think about language often, because language in and of itself is symbol, the way that we speak. So not just the bread, the wine, and the ways that we do gestures and stuff at liturgy, but the words themselves communicate something to us about what God is inviting us to learn, to witness, to engage, to embody. And I think about symbolic language, especially in a Catholic context, it's not something you just are born with. You don't just have it.
You got to learn it.
You have to learn it.
Like any language, you have to learn it. And
exactly.
Have you done immersion before? Language studies?
No.
So I've done it a couple of times, a couple of immersion experiences, and what that means is you're just in a place that speaks another language, and you learn it by having to learn it in order to communicate. I've done that with both French and Spanish, and that's it. You learn it by having to speak it.
Yeah.
You learn it by watching others. You learn it by listening to others. You learn it by listening to two other people talk.
And it becomes part of your bones, if you will. That's the language I always like to use. As you learn it, just as you would learn a language, it just becomes so natural. Looking at so you begin to look at the world, and that sacramental worldview is from a Christian Catholic perspective is that the world is holy. God created good things.
Yes, the world is good.
Right, and so that's how we approach the world. At least in theory, that's what we're supposed to do. I don't know if I always do either, but it's a challenge. That's what we're invited to do, to look at the world as a sacramental presence of Christ, of God. It's maybe not the official sacrament in that same sense, but it is holy.
Sacramental, right, in the sense of holy.
And it invites us to ponder the mystery of God. I just shared with a group of people the other day, that my, mountains are where I sort of experience in a profound way God's mystery. But that's different for each of us, right? But that physical place in the world is sacramental. It draws me into the very mystery of God, and then it invites me back into the liturgy, ideally, in a more profound way because of that kind of encounter.
Yep, exactly. And I think listeners can get that, right? How many people talk about experiencing the divine, experiencing God in nature? Right, and I always use the example of the Grand Canyon. How can you you not stand on the ridge of the Grand Canyon and not just utter a prayer? Oh my God!
Right.
So Pope Francis in his letter, he says that that's the liturgy. And in fact, he says, this is, if those of you are following along at home, paragraph 19, he says, the liturgy takes us by the hand together as an assembly to lead us deep within the mystery that the Word and the sacramental signs reveal to us. And it does this consistent with all action of God, following the way of the Incarnation, that is, by means of the symbolic language of the body, which extends to things in space and time. So the symbolic language comes from the Incarnation, in some sense, is a result of the Incarnation. And so God communicates his presence and his action to us through the created order, through the things he made himself. And that is a symbolic language. So he communicates to us through water. But not just this water used in this baptismal font or sprinkled in this, but all of water, all of the created water.
Right. Well, just as you said that, Todd, I was thinking, again, because of my nerdiness of being a liturgist, again, if I'm in the mountains hiking and I see a river or brook kind of flowing down the mountainside and I'm walking past it, I am that person that thinks about baptism. Because that's me, but that's the example of the sacramental worldview.
Yes, that's the lens.
Because it has changed me in baptism with the waters of rebirth. I can see that water in the mountain or wherever it might be.
In the lake.
Yeah,
on the shores of Lake Michigan.
And you're all probably rolling your eyes like, "Oh, this guy."
No,
but
not
that's,
at all.
That's just the example. How do we see?
He also says that wonder. That the mystery of wonder, right? Wonder is an essential part of the liturgical act because it is the way that those who know they are engaged in the particularity of symbolic gestures look at things. So that's exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah.
How you look at things, how you look at water, how you look at bread. I can't be in a real bakery. Not in the bread aisle.
Yeah.
But in a real bakery where these beautiful loaves of bread are on the shelves behind the counter. I cannot go in and not think of the Eucharist.
Yeah, and just the smell of freshly baked bread makes me think of that in that sense.
Yeah.
There's just no way around it if you're in tune. But that question, it makes me think of in terms of how have we. I'm not exactly sure how to word this. Have we lost that sense of wonder? Like, are we able
Pope Francis raises that question too in Desiderio.
Are we actually, because we have become so efficient, if you will, in society, or and there's probably other ways that we could think about that, but that's even a rehearsed thing. You have to practice and experience wonder. Think about that's one of the gifts of the Spirit, right? Wonder and awe, or whatever they call it these days. But wonder and awe is what it was when I was confirmed. But there is standing in the presence and the mystery of God. Like, how can you not be in wonder? How can you not be in awe? And I think that in some ways, when we come to liturgy, we're coming expecting to just get, and maybe I'm being too black and white about that, as opposed to being vulnerable and receiving and wondering, what does this all mean?
Yeah.
Instead of just give me information and I'll take it in and go home. But that's not what the liturgy was designed. I mean, it's just not what it's supposed to do.
No, that's not the role of liturgy.
Right. It is our worship of God, and it is to draw us into this mystery. And if you aren't leaving with some wonder, some awe, and again, it's hard to judge like that circumstance or your context or my context or whatever it might be, but we should be gathering as a community. And as we are sent forth as the sacramental presence of Christ into the world, there should be some sense of wonder.
Of excitement, of awe, it is worship of God. It is also an encounter with God the Father through Christ in the Spirit. We're talking about symbolic language as Pope Francis addresses it in Desiderio, Desideravi. Stay with us. We'll be back with more focus on liturgy right after these messages.
are hiring. Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago is looking for mission-driven individuals who want to help make a positive difference in the lives of people in need throughout Cook and Lake counties. Be part of a diverse, talented team of professionals in the largest human services organization in the Midwest. We are dedicated to helping people chart a more stable, happier future for themselves, and we accompany anyone in need, regardless of faith, gender, race, or ethnicity. Competitive salaries and generous benefits add to the satisfaction you'll have every day knowing that you're helping us amplify our impact in Chicago. To see our list of employment opportunities, visit CatholicCharities.net.
People always say, how can you spend your day with 3-year-olds? Seeing the changes that they go through and just the journey and how they grow, this is a very rewarding job. Even though at the end of the day, we're not the highest paid people on earth. And when I have a parent contact me and say, my child loves school, that to me, I'm setting that foundation for their love of learning. Because really, you are changing lives, you are molding lives.
Shape the next generation of leaders. Teach. Apply today at archchicago.org/schooljobs.
The cemetery ministry is a core ministry of our Catholic faith tied to the corporal works of mercy. It's comforting to know that our Catholic cemeteries are caring for the remains of our loved ones awaiting the resurrection. There are 44 Archdiocese of Chicago Catholic cemeteries willing to help you in your time of loss. Call 708-449-6100 or visit CatholicCemeteriesChicago.org. Catholic Cemeteries, serving the Catholic community since 1837.
You're listening to Catholic Chicago. Ahead, the Archdiocese of Chicago brings you programs about the people, events, and issues that touch our lives. Thanks for letting us be part of your morning. Now again, Catholic Chicago.
Welcome back to Catholic Chicago. We were just talking during that break. Producer Mike, is this our last segment? Nope, we got one more break. Okay. All right, we're in the second half. Welcome back to the second half of Focus on the Liturgy. We got so caught up in our conversation. Right. I lost. All right, anyway, sorry. So back to Pope Francis and in his letter, he asks this at paragraph 45 in the letter. He kind of gets to the here's the bottom line, right? Timothy kind of says, so the question I want to pose is, how can we become once again capable of symbols? How can we again know how to read them and be able to live them? To read the symbols, to that symbolic language, right? And to live the symbols. He says, we know well that the sacraments are efficacious, right? We know in our head, we know what we've been taught. But
and maybe just clarify efficacious, meaning that it does what it says it's going to do, is kind of the way I've always been said. Like it's
it
real.
Does something.
It does something. It's not. So when water is poured at baptism and we say it forgives sins and makes you a new creation, it actually does that. It isn't just like, oh, nice sign. Because symbols are real. Yes. Symbols are real. Like that's the hard part sometimes, I think, for us culturally. So efficacious means like when we anoint you with that oil and we say those prayers, that you are truly sealed with the Holy Spirit and made, there's the word I'm looking for, I can't think of, but signed for Christ. Conformed
more closely to the image of Christ. That's what the documents say about that. Yeah, exactly. We know that, but this does not guarantee the full engagement of people, right? Because exactly what you were just saying. We know it in our head, but is in the face, the next baptism you go to, standing there, watching that child die in the waters of the font, and watching God recreate that child through those waters into an image of his beloved Son. Yeah. Are you engaged by that? That's what he means. Do you know this language well enough that you receive the truth that this symbol is conveying, this language is conveying?
Yeah, I I love the excitement. If you're not watching, you weren't able to see Todd's face, but he gets very excited. And there's something true about that, because when we can speak the language, and we've so using that example of baptism, when we've already celebrated it ourselves, we know the joy and excitement that comes from that life in Christ. And I know for myself, when I have participated in a baptism, whether as a godparent or a member of the assembly, I am, like you just were, overwhelmed with excitement because of what God is doing in those waters. Yeah. And again, it's because of the language. Like, I can relate to, I can speak to it. I've reflected on it. I've taken time and that's not just on me. Like, I've done that with my family. I've done that in groups. I've had good pastors that helped accompany that journey, right? The way they preach or celebrate the rites in that way. And that, I think, is what, as Pope Francis is saying, like, when you're there the next time, don't just say, oh, I have to get through this, but be present, be vulnerable to what is celebrated, and reflect on, because it does communicate something back to me as well, even though I'm not the one in the waters of baptism.
About your own baptism.
It reminds me of that. I've gone through this, whether as an infant, as an adult, whatever it might be. Like, I share, and now they share in the fullness of what I share in. Even when I'm not perfect, we're still in this together, right?
Yep.
And that's something really, really exciting to celebrate as a church. Like, that when we gather for these sacramental moments, whether in Mass, which is my preference, of course, or outside of Mass, that the profundity of what happens demands
of what God is doing, the profundity of what God is doing.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what else to say, because it's just so, like, it's so profound.
Pope Francis goes on to say that, and I think this is exactly what we're talking about, Timothy. He says a symbolic, quote unquote, reading, right? So a symbolic reading of these liturgies, of these sacraments, of these symbolic actions of pouring water, anointing with the Spirit, extending hands over bread and wine. So a symbolic reading is not a mental knowledge. It's not that academia we were talking about, but rather a living experience.
Yeah.
And maybe that's maybe that's the question. He says, are we capable of symbol? And maybe another way of asking that question is this: do we really believe that God acts in these?
I mean,
do we really believe that these moments are moments of encounter with the living Christ?
I think that is a great question, because, as I look back in my own ministry, I'll just share this. Like, that's oftentimes where my frustration in liturgy or ministry comes from, is when I ask that question, because for some reason it seems like the profundity of what God is doing isn't resonating with the gathered community in the way that I want it to. And this is more about me, right? But I do think that's a great question then to think about. Do we as a community that gather believe what is actually happening?
What we say we believe, right?
Yeah. And it isn't just that I believe it, because I can believe it, and the rest, and this is a dramatic example, the rest of the community might not. It still happens, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
But that shared experience, the shared symbolic language isn't there. It's physically present, we're doing it, but there's also that heart knowledge. It's not the academic knowledge, right? It's that symbolic reading.
And heart knowledge comes through experience.
Yeah.
Right? I can say that I've encountered the living Christ in this sacrament because I've had an experience of Christ somehow connected to this experience. That would be your walking in the mountains, encountering a stream, and having baptism come to your mind.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, who was it? I forget. Father Gil Ostick, I think, maybe, professor at Catholic Theological Union here in Chicago, always talked about it this way. Part of the power of our liturgical sacramental symbols come from our experience of them in the rest of life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So an example of that is part of the power of the sacramental symbol of water comes from my own human experience of being literally parched, dried throat. and
Yeah.
the quenching experience of that first drink of water. Or part of the power of this, the sacramental symbol of water, comes from my own human experience of being literally filthy, caked in sweat and dirt after being mowing a lawn, after working out in the yard or out in the garden, and literally I have dirt caked on me.
And the satisfaction of watching
Water wash that away.
Yeah.
Or last one, a plant that is just this close, and my fingers are barely spread apart, this close to death, and then watching after a healthy dose of water, it come back to life. Part of the power of the symbolic, the sacramental symbol of water comes from those experiences. But you have to make the connections, as you were saying earlier, the experience.
So what does a parish do, Todd? Or what can a parish or
You've been
individuals
listening
do?
to Focus on the Liturgy. Be with us next month when we...
when we could to answer.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some things come to my mind. Again, whether they solve the problem is not the case, but I think helping people become more aware of what they see in the world and being able to identify and name wonder, name those moments of awe. I do think that through preaching and through the experience of connecting, and I think I thought about this as you were just saying, what you shared. Like, I don't think Pope Francis could have written this document without his real encounter with Christ.
No.
Like, this comes from his own experience of sitting on that bus in Argentina, driving, going to work as he did, right? He in Buenos Aires, right? He didn't. The fineries of his ministry weren't there in the same ways that maybe we experience sometimes in the United States. His work with the people, and I think in our own communities, what are we doing that bridges the real lived experience in our neighborhood with the liturgical experience? And how are we reflecting on that together as community? And oftentimes the primary way we can do that is through preaching, through small faith sharing groups, whether in person or in Zoom. But I do think for all of us who are listening, who participate, this is a real question we have to think about. Are we capable of doing this? And how do we resurrect or strengthen or hone our ability to do symbolic reading?
Yeah. To speak the language of symbols. I agree with you. I think that's a real question. I was tongue in cheek. I think that's a question we have a responsibility to address in this show, right? So how can parishes help? I agree with you. I think it's through preaching. I think it's through catechetical efforts in formation, offering formation opportunities around these symbols, and around these symbolic actions. I think it's how we as parish leaders talk about these symbols, even just in general conversation, not in any formal, teaching moment or formation experience, but I mean just in how we talk about them in general,
and how they're used. Do we use cared for? Do we use water at baptism robustly? Do we use oil at baptism, confirmation? Whenever, oil of catechumens or the chrism, are we using them in a significant way instead of rushing or just a dab? But are we using them in a way that communicates what we believe? And that's hard to answer, of course, in a sense of our own aesthetics, because different people have different aesthetics in that sense. But they communicate visually. They communicate the reality of what's happening. So how do we do that?
They will communicate whether we want them to or not.
Right.
The question is, will they communicate well, or poorly? Right. Right. I think this is a great question. And when we come back from this last break, I think it has to do with the whole liturgical life of a parish. We'll come back to that. That's where we'll pick it up when we come back. Stay with us through this final break for more Focus on the Liturgy.
At Catholic Charities, we want to remind you that we are here for anyone who is a victim of domestic violence or anyone who has a concern about someone they think may be a victim. Domestic violence affects millions of people each year, both women and men, of every race, religion, culture, and economic status. It includes physical, psychological, and emotional abuse, inflicted in both subtle and overt ways. The impact on children can be devastating. If you or someone you know are victims of domestic violence and you are looking for a place for healing and recovery, call us at 773-935-3434 in Cook County and 224-430-4977 in Lake County. A safer, happier tomorrow can begin today.
Welcome back.
Es fabuloso verlos.
Dobrze jest znowu być razem.
It's good to be together again.
After so many months apart, pandemic capacity limits have been lifted, and we want to welcome everyone back to church. We can all pray together again. And listen as our choirs lift their voices in song.
We've been together in spirit.
And now, when you are ready, our doors are open wide.
Nuestras puertas están abiertas de par en par.
Nasze drzwi są otwarte.
And we're here to welcome you back to Catholic Mass.
Do you have an old bicycle that's not being used? Consider donating it to Catholic Charities Veterans Bike Project of Lake County. Skilled volunteers are refurbishing bicycles to make them safe and ready to be used by veterans to get to and from their new places of work. We also gratefully accept financial contributions that are used to purchase bike helmets and other safety accessories. Our veterans have faithfully served the United States, and now it is our privilege to serve them. For more information on the Veterans Bike Project of Lake County, call 847-782-4219. That's 847-782-4219.
Welcome back to this final segment of Focus on the Liturgy. I'm Todd Williamson from the Office for Divine Worship.
And I'm Timothy Johnston from St. Thomas the Apostle.
And we are talking about symbolic language. We're talking about symbols and symbolic action that Pope Francis addresses in his latest apostolic letter to the whole church, Desiderio, Desideravi, on the liturgical formation of the people of God. And Timothy, he asks that question. How can we become once again capable of symbols? How can we relearn the language of symbol? And in particular, liturgical symbol and sacramental symbol. And we said, before that last break, I made the comment that I think it's part of, I think it has to do with the whole liturgical life of a parish. If the only place this language is used and entered into is 1 hour a week on Sunday, you're not going to learn the language. I mean, I talked about just our experiences of immersion and trying to learn another language, right? We need to immerse our people in this language, and so what I think that means is we need to develop and build the liturgical lives of our parishes. So in other words, if all we're doing is relying on Sunday Mass, and that sounds terrible to say it like that, the profundity of the Mass, right? But if that's gonna, it can't bear that weight. One liturgy a week cannot bear that weight. So I think we need to develop how we use this language in liturgy. We need to develop our liturgical lives through the rest of the week in other offerings, liturgy of the hours, blessings, the other sacraments. How does your parish celebrate funerals? How does your parish celebrate weddings? Are they full communal events? Are they celebrations of this community, or are they private?
Right.
Baptisms on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I think both funerals and baptisms, for me, are good examples. If one of the things, if you see that there's going to be a funeral in your parish, even if you don't know that person, you can go and be part of the community, because they're part of your parish, they're part of your family, and you can also be a support to the family that maybe are coming from outside the parish. You witness and you model the life of this local church, this local community that you are part of, in that sense. And baptism's the same thing. Private sacraments do not exist. That's what I was telling Todd during, they just don't exist. And I know we still
There is no such thing.
Yeah, and we use that language, or there are people that use that language. I do not use that language, but they do not exist. So I think the way we use our language as well is formative. So I would encourage you or others that are in this kind of work to catch yourself if you start using that kind of language, because the church's liturgy is public. It is for all of us. So go to that baptism.
Yeah.
Go to that wedding.
I was on staff at a parish where every funeral during the week was celebrated at a daily mass. It was the already scheduled daily mass, which has a community, right? There are those people who are able and go every day to daily mass. Well, that's where funerals were celebrated. It wasn't a special scheduled thing. I agree. I think the more that we can offer people the opportunity to hear this language of liturgical and sacramental symbol, the more we can offer those experiences, the more that we can shape them and form them in learning this language.
Well, and a really great way, or at least a way of thinking of, that this might be able to happen in parish life, is looking at the process of Christian initiation. Because one of the things that we're doing in that process as a community, not just the little group that meets in the parish hall or wherever they're meeting, but our responsibility as the baptized is to help them learn this symbolic language.
Do you know how many times the RCIA, pardon me, how many times the RCIA has entered my head in this? The responsibility we have to teach catechumens and candidates the language of symbol.
Yeah, and that's how they learn to pray. Like when we're together for those blessings, when we're at weddings or funerals, or when we're bringing them and we're also celebrating with them, that teaches them, it helps them embody that sacramental symbolic language, so that they begin to speak that language. So you have a natural way to begin to work with your initiation coordinators, because throughout their catechumenal process, they're ideally celebrating words of God, the Word of God. So liturgy of the Word, they're doing blessings. And we can be part of that. They're being anointed with the oil of catechumens at different times. So if there's a special Wednesday night or a parish gathering, let's say Advent's coming up, a lot of parishes do days of renewal. Well, maybe part of that morning prayer or closing prayer at that day of renewal is a blessing with catechumens as part of that.
Right.
And they come to some, and then you begin to see that language in other capacities that you can, it bears the weight differently than, right?
I think parents can help by speaking this language at home with their children, right? And so having holy water in the house, having the scriptures enthroned, right, or open in a place, and proclaimed in a celebration of the word with the family. I think how we have a meal together.
I think that's a huge component. I mean, I think
how merciful we are to one another.
Yeah, and how do you reconcile within the family? Oh,
how and then so for us as parish leaders and diocesan leaders, how can we enable our families to do that? How can we teach our families to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great, because that's one of the things I hear often from younger parents. Often is like, well, I don't know how to do this at home, because that wasn't their experience growing up. like they have a desire to learn.
How can you pass on a language that you yourself don't know?
Have? And so maybe that's, again, something, if that, as a listener, you have that language and you know there's young parents or others maybe struggling or they have questions, mentor them, support them, walk with them, show them what you've done in your home or with your children, and share those ideas. I think that's really important because that's, the environment I grew up in was that. I mean, though my siblings
was very supportive.
Recall that as much as I do, but I remember sitting around the Advent wreath and we prayed every night, or during Lent we had special prayers. There was always a Bible. There was always a statue of the Blessed Virgin that I would end up taking care of and sort of decorating because I was that kid. But that's the other thing. Don't be afraid. Try something. Liturgy Training Publications has a resource called Celebrating Catholic Families, I think.
Yes.
Or it's something like that. I should know this. But it's designed for parents to use with children on their way to Mass and from Mass, where it provides the scripture, it provides a little discussion question that you as a family, so that's a way to kind of enter into practicing if you don't know exactly what to do, where it's a little scripted and begins to kind of help you listen differently to the liturgy.
I think Signs and Symbols exercise that Liturgy Training Publications publishes would be an excellent resource for parishes helping their people to rediscover, as Pope Francis is calling us to in Desiderio, Desideravi, relearn, rediscover the language of symbolic action and symbolic movement.
Yeah, and I think, again, just to add to that,
mysticaci.
I was going to say, with your first communicants, after first reconciliation, sit down and talk about the experience and the symbols and the encounter of those symbols with those young people, because if we practice it then and we keep practicing as we get older, that language just becomes ingrained in our bones.
We learn it. It becomes, exactly like you said, it becomes part of our bones, part of our flesh, right?
Yeah.
And even Pope Francis said earlier in this letter about baptism, how we are bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh in that. And that's the language, right? So that's the language to relearn. And none of this happens instantly.
Right.
But a parish and its leadership needs to be committed to it.
Yeah.
A concerted effort along those lines. We're breaking open Pope Francis's call to relearn the language of liturgy, the language of sacrament, symbolic language in his letter Desiderio, Desideravi. We will continue in the coming months to break open more themes and aspects of this. So until then,
God bless everyone.
God bless everyone.
Join us every Monday through Friday at this time for Catholic Chicago. You can stream our programs live or listen to past programs by visiting our website, archchicago.org, and clicking on Radio TV. And please connect with Catholic Chicago on social media.